Order, would you call the roll, please?
Vice Mayor Schaefer.
Here.
Vice Chairman Jones.
Here.
Chairman Hellinger.
Here. A motion for the approval of the minutes.
So moved for approval of the motion summary from February 28th.
Second. Roll.
Vice Mayor Schaefer.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Jones.
Yes.
Chairman Hellinger.
Yes. First up is our Oak Grove Cemetery Master Plan.
Yeah, I'm going to turn that over to Dean and Ted, but this really is just an outgrowth of our taking ownership of that cemetery a couple of years ago and coming up with a kind of a game plan, long-range game plan.
Just a couple quick comments before Ted gets up there. Again, if you recall, several months ago, late into last year, we talked about moving forward with cemetery issues. And one of those discussions points was whether we could create a cemetery advisory committee. There's a lot of issues related to what may or may not go on at that cemetery. At that time, council was reluctant to create another committee and ultimately said that we would either use some of our existing committees as a sounding board. We did contract couple months ago to have a cemetery master plan performed out at the cemetery. A lot of it's looking at how we expand capacity. We're pretty much don't have a whole lot of lots, so to speak. Not the lots the developers are talking about, but similar ones. We don't have a lot of excess space to put people in. And but there's better ways of moving forward with creating space out there and different types of space as opposed to just opening up a new section. We have land out there to expand. So part of the master plan was to kind of assist us with looking at what makes that cemetery a little bit more attractive, so to speak, as a final resting place. Another element of the master plan, we're going to look at cemetery regulations and issues like that, so it'll evolve into other matters. Part of the process includes reaching out and getting some citizen input. So at some point, we're going to want to have some discussion about how best to approach that. But I believe today they're really at an initial phase looking at some conceptual plans for how we move forward with the development, primarily from an infrastructure standpoint. And so they have a quick presentation here today to get just to bounce and show you where we're at with things and go from there.
Dean said it pretty much all, so I'm going to introduce Jose Castron. He's the consultant, and he's going to kind of work through some concepts. We haven't got to any estimates or some, figuring out what kind of costs are involved in this, but we're, looking at how we can, what Dean said, how we can expand the cemetery and looking into the future and make it more sustainable. So with that, I'll just introduce Jose here and
thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the time. And thanks for the introduction, and all the staff involvement so far has been great. So I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys. As was discussed, our role as master planners, when we do also do subdivisions, so it's kind of funny, it is kind of the same thing, right? We're designing spaces. We are designing spaces for really for the living. Part of the whole concept of cemetery design. Yes, sir.
Can we get your name and
Sure.
address for the record?
Sure. Jose Kesterholm. I'm with McGill Smith Punchin, 3700 Park 42 Drive, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45241.
Thank you, sir.
We've been in business for over 160 years. One of our specialties is cemetery design. We were actually, our first job was with Spring Grove Cemetery down in Cincinnati. We did the design work back in 1856, I believe, and since then they're still our client. Since they call us every week, I think, but we've been doing all kinds of design work, but cemeteries is one of the things that is part of our business. So with that said, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I just want to give you an update of kind of where we've been. As we got hired to do the master plan, part of the whole discovery phase is to understand what are the opportunities, what are the constraints, what does the city want in the development, and how can we get there. So we're trying to develop that process. So we're still very early on in that process. So we've analyzed the site, we walked the site with staff, we understand what are some of the constraints. So just to kind of get familiar with the existing conditions, you've obviously all know what it looks like. I'm not going to bore you with that information, but you have a very beautiful historic cemetery that has a lot of unique aspects to it. So if you think about it as a park, a place where people go visit their loved ones, it's a nice setting. That's, I think, kind of something that you want to kind of continue to follow in the design aspect. So as you start running out of room in putting in burial sites, we're looking at I apologize, the pointer won't work on the screen, but the remaining meadow on the left side of the screen there, we are looking at that as kind of one of the stages for development. How can we get in-ground burials, and what kind of time frame will that give you as you continue the growth of the cemetery? And we feel that that area is going to give you a lot of opportunity, not just in continuing the concept that you have of the curvilinear roadway system, the different meadows, and introducing new plant material and trees to create that setting. Because as part of what we do, sales are also critical. People look for, just like when you're picking houses, location, location, location. We have to do the same thing. So making sure that we keep that setting in place. So we've looked at a couple alternate concepts of how to redo or add some roadway system, or we call sections, but also create some focal points. And the reason we do that is because there's going to be opportunities when you have a service here that you have, when you have a funeral come through and you need a place to have a memorial service, we want to give those opportunities. So we're looking at that. So we're looking at how we're going to look at parking, how we're going to look at access, how we're going to maybe deal with some stormwater management issues by possibly adding a water feature, knowing full well that there's some maintenance issues and costs associated with that. And we'll get that at the end of we're kind of going to give you a document that says, okay, here's what you want, here's where the constraints are, and here's what it's going to cost you. So we'll also then do a phasing plan. So as part of the development, we want to create unique elements within this 15 acres to really kind of give you a plan that's going to give you enough opportunity for the next 30, 40 years of cemetery burial. At the same time, we're also going to look at unique trends out there with cremation and scatterings and all those types of opportunities, and we're going to incorporate that as we evolve in this plan. So these are just two different alternatives on how we can do the road systems, how we can do some of the focal points, and what are some of the elements. And obviously, we'll be working with staff on all these. And at the same time, we're also going to be visiting. You guys are going to be visiting some of our projects, some other projects, to get some inspiration for that and see what works and what doesn't work. So if you're familiar with the area, that center asterisk piece is where the veteran section is currently. So that's kind of what we're going to use in this case as a cornerstone to build around and take advantage of some of those great views that you have and so on and so forth. At the same time, we realize that cremation is becoming a lot more popular. 40% in Ohio is becoming, it's growing to about 40% burials are going through cremains. And cremation has become one of those things where either, your loved one ends up on a mantle in your home or in a cemetery. So what our job is to allow and create a great setting for you to maybe stay at the cemetery, have something, a nice peaceful setting so you can go visit your loved ones. A lot of the things that we've looked at in cremation in the past that have failed is because they're just kind of put in leftover spots. Well, we have an empty spot, let's just spend 50 grand on a columbarium and hope for the best. Well, usually that's when they fail. What we try to do is create a space for it, a setting, somewhere where you can go visit and you feel comfortable. You feel like you can really maybe even spend money to accommodate that. So you have an area halfway through the cemetery that there's some stormwater management issues. You're straightening out a creek because of some erosion. We felt that as a great setting to maybe do some infill development. And by what I mean by that is create more of a niche areas for cremation, walls, niche walls for the simple 12 by 12 columbarium type, and create a nice setting without overpowering the space, because you can't recreate that. You can't rebuild that. It's very beautiful and be very hard and very expensive. So we're going to kind of steal some of that landscape and introduce some unique things to it. So we think that's kind of a neat area. So we're going to study that middle piece. And these are just several options of the same area by creating different alternatives. what we call maybe a memory walk. So as you get out of the car, you're able to walk to your loved one and feel like you can have a nice, peaceful time. We've seen people read books there, come visit for hours. So we're trying to create that space. Again, we're designing for the living. That's the important part.
Jose, just real quick, and I don't know if you recall, how many of you have been out to the cemetery and how often, as you go in, there's a big parking lot, and you go back a little bit on the main drag, there's like a walking bridge, a wooden bridge, and there's the creek or the drainage swale that runs through there. Just as you go across that bridge and go down a little bit, there's kind of like a lowland area, and it's just sitting there now. There's a big mausoleum. I think he has a picture of it.
Yeah,
on the one far end. It's been there for years and years. But between that and the road out there, there's just not a lot. It's just dead. I hate to say it, but space we're not using. We actually had
I've heard
somebody.
them all, don't worry.
We had somebody contribute $25,000 to plant some trees to improve the area, and our guys actually put a few trees in there, which we may relocate. Because it was kind of viewed as non-usable space. It just where it sat, and sometimes the creek would spill over the banks a little bit. But so we have drainage issues related to that. But when we were out there on the tours, one of the things we're bringing in, experts like that. Jose saw that and like, wow, that would be a great space for basically what he's just talked about. And it's in the existing footprint of the older part of the cemetery. It's one of those issues from a cost standpoint, even though there is some incremental cost, obviously, but it's one of I think the improvements of any that has that possibility that by selling the spaces and conserving space, because you're dealing with not that large of a space, it'll pay out in the end run, because we'll be able to recoup the investment in some of the amenities he's talking about, and that's where the business side of that comes into play, and we're trying to look pretty broadly at what some of the opportunities are.
Yeah, and it's a good point. The picture on the bottom left at Spring Grove Cemetery, it was their historic section. They were having some erosion problems, so they looked at. Of course, they call us all the time and said, "Hey, can we do something with this erosion?" And we're looking at plant material and all this stuff. And we said, "Well, how about we do a retaining wall, but then we put product on it?" So instead of just doing a functional aspect, we did a retaining wall, put niches on it, and then floated a deck on the water. It is amazing what kind of money they get, because it's a private cemetery, obviously that's different. But now in the historic section, where it used to be closed unless you've bought a family plot a long time ago, now they're providing additional sales within the historic cemetery portion of it.
The other issue we have is we have existing drainage issues that are not so much cemetery driven, they're citywide. We put a lot of money into improvements on the east side, basically on South Sandusky Street, and going to the west where it all drains from is coming in there, but through the cemetery proper, talking to utility people, we really, at one point, we were going to open it up, and then we were going to put in a pipe and all that sort of stuff. We kind of held off. So, there's some resources we're going to need to work with, but, addressing that and incorporating that into how ultimately we may expand the cemetery, I think is an important thing to do. The other thing, just from a historical standpoint, that area there at one point, there's some old pictures that we have, was actually a little lake pond. It was kind of neat at one point in time.
Yeah. So again, instead of recreating something, why don't we borrow some landscape and maybe get something unique out of it? So that was another area. The other area that we looked at is kind of that whole first impression. How do you appear to the public as you come in the door, front door, right? So there's some issues. That's a historic picture that was provided to us. That was your old historic entrance. So it's got some unique architecture to it. It's kind of neat. So we said, well, what happens if we do a couple options at the front entrance? So this is your front entrance. You see the existing house on the upper side. We thought, wouldn't it be great if we got rid of all that pavement or some of that pavement? To us, my first impression, being honest with you, first thing I said is, why is there all this pavement? That's the first thing I saw. Historic, beautiful trees, and then you have all this sea of asphalt. And I understand why. I mean, you're setting up funerals. You're just the way it was. You've paved it because it's there. You pave it, right? So working with staff, we realized that maybe there's an opportunity to still maintain that flow of traffic during a funeral and how you staged and set up. But what happens if we then provide focal points? So as you enter, instead of looking at a sea of pavement, what happens if you look at a columbarium to take care of that 40% cremation that is happening in our part of Ohio, and get some sales there. Provide some parking. And one of the unique things that you have as a cemetery is that you don't have an on-site salesperson. You have to deal with some, off-site things. So we were trying to help you and maybe provide a gathering spot, a place to stop to get information and then make the phone call that acts like it's a cemetery, not just a parking lot, if that makes sense. So this is an option where, bless you, where we would get rid of some of that pavement. And in this concept on the upper right is utilizing that house, the existing house, as a potential rental opportunity for you guys. If you're not going to use it as a part of the cemetery, just add a driveway off of the main street and not part of the drive. We looked at both ways. So if you look in the upper right picture, we dropped in a driveway. There's no driveway there. So the intent would be is that you can get some revenue from that house, but disconnected from the cemetery in this concept.
Do you think it's practical to rent a house within the cemetery?
Well,
I mean, I know anecdotally we had heard that the Oak Grove Cemetery Association would often get requests from people to live there. Do you think?
I've seen, you have a lot of houses that back up to the cemetery already.
Right.
Right. So this would just be, we would screen it and we would put the driveway, make it not part of.
I see. So
you would put it on, Sandusky Street. So if you look at the picture on the upper right, we put in a driveway just graphically on the upper, there's no driveway there.
Okay. Okay.
So that's one way of doing it. Obviously with the need is, it might come to time that as you start getting more interments, you might need to have a on-site. So we gave you 3 options. So this is one option where you could potentially use the house and rent it out. We have a concept. Oops, sorry. I'm going to go back. We have a concept that uses the house as it used to be, but now you're running is it worth the cost to, do that? Somebody's got to do a master plan just for the house. We're trying to give you options to see, is one of our recommendations going to be to look at the house for, is it worth doing rentals? So a similar community to yours, the city of Lebanon on the upper left has a similar cemetery, and they have a historic house that they've renovated. It's beautiful. Now, how much do they subsidize it? Is it worth the cost? I don't know. It's something that you guys have to feel, is it worth it or not? They do have so if a family comes in and wants to meet somebody to buy some property, they go in and meet. 80% of the time, there's nobody in there. Is that worth it or not? Don't know.
It's considered historic?
It's historic-alike. I don't think it's necessarily historic.
It's an old house.
Yeah. The one in Lebanon is a historic house, but it's been renovated. In this concept, one of the thoughts are, right now you have a sign that says, please call this number for, we thought maybe doing something more of like a university kiosk where you can at least have some kind of information to say, here's the number, here's some information, something that's more permanent so people can feel like, okay, now I know where to go, instead of hoping to see that little sign that you have that's this big.
It was always our intent to have a part of moving the office when we took over down here was having some variation of a kiosk. Hopefully we can get electricity to it and maybe even connect into our database. So people are just out there trying to find some whatever research or whatever else they have it there. Also having a register paper one that they can look at. Yeah. But where and how we incorporate it in is one of the.
In this case, we would potentially have it kind of in that little island. We have a little drop off. We again break up some of that pavement. And then in the bottom left, you have that asterisk. Maybe there's another little low meadow there by the creek. Again, always trying to introduce product without having to add road to sell product. You already have the space. Let's potentially do something. So as you turn the corner, we're directing your eye. You have a great backdrop of trees to provide some kind of an element for you to look at and say, I really I want to buy a spot here. And then we went to the concept, what happens if the house gets torn down? what can we do back here? Well, now you have great visibility, obviously, from Sandusky Street, that you could actually provide a lot of cremation product right off the bat with minimal, you have the pavement, you have access to it, and that's half the battle. How can grandma go visit grandpa and not have to walk 2 miles, right? So we want to make sure that that's a possibility. So we looked at 2 concepts. And then, for example, in this concept, wouldn't it be great if we introduced the columns of the historical gate, instead of having them at the gate, make that the entrance to a cremation garden where the house used to be. So if you can imagine that octagon shape, that would be kind of like the back porch of that house. And you would walk into this garden and have product, whether it's a columbarium, whether it's scattering, and introduce history into it, and have maybe some parking associated with it. So now you're taking care of the cremation needs with minimal, you don't have to add a road to it. And it's highly visible with some nice soft landscaping. So when you're sitting in the space, you don't feel like you're on display from Sandusky Street, but close enough that you can see what's going on. So we're looking at all these options. And then kind of the final option, we had a discussion with your staff last week, and we said, well, what about that barn, right? What happens with that barn? Our architects have renovated 4 or 5 barns for different reasons, for either Parks and Rec stuff, or we did a 400-acre housing community where we renovated an 1881 barn and made it into a community center with a pool and the whole bit. So it's not that it's not doable, it's just having the right use for it and getting there. So again, we're dangerous enough that we know what we're doing, but it all comes down to dollars, and is it worth the value of getting there? So one of the thoughts, and if you can imagine, this is your existing facility where you have the maintenance building and the barn. What would happen, and you own the property behind it, what would happen if we created a small parking lot in the back? So let me back up a little bit. So in a typical cemetery or funeral, you go to the funeral home, everything happens, you go to the cemetery, and then afterwards you have a celebration of life, right? Whether you go back to the funeral, you go back to somebody's house. We've had a lot of cemetery clients of ours trying to find a spot where you're already at the funeral, at the cemetery. Why couldn't we have a space to have a celebration there? So we've had people come to us, and we've designed, they haven't built them yet, but almost small banquet facilities. So our architects have worked on that to utilize some of their ground to create that banquet facility to the right size. What would happen, again, these are just ideas, if we could have access to the back of that barn, provide a small parking lot. After a funeral, have a place where you can gather, have a celebration of life, have an outdoor patio, have a little bit of parking, and renovate that barn. You could also rent that barn for, 4-H, garden club of whatever you have opportunities is how you program it. It's not very big, but it is historic looking, and it can be, we've done it where it's fully air conditioned and good to go year round, and we've done it where it's kind of a 3-season kind of space. And in this concept, keeping the maintenance building and providing screening and all that. In this concept, we said, what happens if we got rid of the maintenance building and move that to the back where it really probably should be, kind of in the back in that new section. That's where most of the burials are going to happen anyways. Yes, you got to cut the grass, but okay, so you do the loop backwards instead of this way, you flip it. And then now you create another space within those great trees you have and create additional burial space on the current footprint of the maintenance facility to do some kind of a fountain focal point. You have power there, obviously. You could do cremation niches. You can do all kinds of neat things. And again, you're creating setting, you're creating a space for product, and maybe get some revenue potentially out of that barn, because that's one of the thoughts. So we're trying to hit those big pieces. Part of this plan, as discussed earlier, there's going to be other little things that come into play, from maintenance issues and rules and regulations and things like that that I want to bore you with, but those are the kind of things we're working on, and we just kind of wanted to give you an update on kind of why we're doing this and the process that we're going through. So with that, anything that I miss or?
No. They may have some questions. Just want to add a little bit to it, what Jose said. What we ultimately hope to do, there's going to be some cost estimates associated with some of these things. And I want to be able to look at it more from a financial planning standpoint and say, what about the revenues? What could offset? Like anything else, the cemetery's neat, it's old, it's historic, but it needs a facelift. And as you found out at last council meeting, there are people, you need to think of this as a little bit more than just a cemetery. It is a park-like setting. It was supposedly and always was intended to be some sort of an arboretum type of thing. There's a lot of mature trees. You had the situation with the proposal for the group to have the horse and buggies going through there. People do walk out there. There's just, so you kind of got to keep in mind too that it is somewhat of a park setting too. And when we look at that, we put improvements in parks that don't have necessarily a revenue stream always associated with them. Obviously, it has to be within our ability to fund and find some resources. There are revenue streams that will be associated with this. And as things move more towards things like, and I think Jose brought it up in a pretty good sense, you can just slap a columbarium out there. They're easy, to buy, but that in and of itself doesn't always necessarily get it. Having the setting and doing a little bit with the aesthetics, it creates what he refers to as product that's easier to sell, but it also adds to that park setting type of thing. And I think people can appreciate that walking and pushing and doing whatever else they may do out there. So ultimately, as we move through this process, we're going to start looking more at some of the economics. We do have some resources available from when it transitioned, the funds. We want to make sure those are allocated, and we've talked about that in the past, towards immediate issues, safety, priority maintenance issues, and different things like that. But we'll look at how it expands, and it'll be a long period of time. Our hope is, I think it'll get to that point where it'll be a lot more popular. I think we get about 90, Ted, I don't know if you know, about 90 burials a year or so, maybe a little bit more than that. And I think if we made some of these improvements, I could easily see that doubling. One of the goals is to get that to the point, especially the people in the community, that they feel very much comfortable getting buried out there. We see a lot of people that'll go elsewhere. They lived in Delaware all their life, and so we want to, I want to add that pride element back into it, make it a community asset. But we'll present as we move forward. We want to kind of, we've got about another couple of months. We want to keep working through this and stay on task with that. But we'll add some financial elements, what some of these things may cost, how it may be phased, how that may be worked out with how we can front end some of the money, because we'll have to build some of it and hope they'll come. But a big part of that is having the right type of setting and right type of product.
Jose, what have you seen in terms of the governance of cemeteries? This obviously was originally the cities, then it went to an association.
Right.
The association then had to dissolve, and it came back to the city. What are some of the models out there you see for governance of cemeteries? I mean,
You mean
how they're governed? Is it by a city, private associations?
both? And
What's your experience?
well, we've worked for both, obviously, both from a private cemetery, and I think the big difference between the two, other than, let's compare this cemetery to like Oak Grove Cemetery in Cincinnati, which is, I think, one of the cemeteries that your staff's going to go visit. That one's a private cemetery, similar setting, similar opportunities. It's governed by a private entity. They can charge more. That's the big difference. They have a different revenue type model. So the lots by lakes are more expensive than lots by a street, and they have a different, so that's what we've seen. The biggest difference is that so you have to be careful with how kind of dollars you price it. Now the value of working with municipal cemeteries is they have maybe a little bit more horsepower in maintenance sometimes, in that they have opportunities to have equipment and things like that. So kind of like a give and take. And so there's a balancing act in how much you charge, because you're obviously providing a service to your community, and where is there a value? Is there a different price structure? And so we'll be looking at that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Well, for something we inherited
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, was it 3 years ago?
Longer than that, I think it's been about 5 years or
Five?
5 or 6.
Yeah, and if I could add one more thing, I think because of our experience in cemetery, I'm also a landscape architect, so we design parks and all kinds of different spaces for people. And, back in the, late 1800s, early 1900s, there weren't many public parks out there. So people use cemeteries as a place to enjoy nature. And let's just use Spring Grove, for example. They program that space. They do a great job. Even though it's a private cemetery, they do all kinds of stuff. And that doesn't mean you couldn't do that. 5Ks, veterans events, car shows, they have weddings there. I mean, all kinds of stuff that not just the service that they're providing for the community isn't just for burial, but they're providing another service of, it's a great space. It is an arboretum. You have some wonderful plant material in there that I think you could, especially with the university on site, whether you could have some kind of an educational component. I don't know if there's a horticulture department, whatever they have, that is a opportunity to study and have some kind of a joint effort. So I think you have great opportunity above and beyond what we can draw and design. Programming is probably going to be kind of something that you should look into. So with that said.
Excellent. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Just one real comment as we're changing. You think at it broadly. This is a community cemetery. We don't have a whole lot of other ones necessarily. There are people, and maybe since whatever 5 years, 6 years it's been, I pay attention when I go to other cities what their cemeteries look like. But I think too, when you look at a community, you start looking at things, economic development, you look at development and people, quality of life issues. People will, if they drive into a community and they're looking at whether they want to move to a community, if they say something like this in a facility that looks, it says something. It says the community has a certain level of care and whatnot. And if it's the opposite, that might say something. If this community doesn't, take care of these sort of things, what does that say about the community as a whole? So hopefully we think real holistically and real big picture issues as far as what role that cemetery could play in the community.
Finance committee have a problem with you kind of acting as the kind of committee of council for now?
Don't bother me.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll evolve into looking at the
There'll be
economics, and that's why I think it'll be something I'm sure hands on.
I'm a huge fan of
Well, I know you've used
it all the time. I go there all the time. That's why I just spoke with kind of the subject, but I think at some point I'd like to see us address. This is all new development type stuff, but I think there's still a cleanup process of the existing.
Yeah,
A lot
ongoing.
of
You mean the main-
overturned, old,
Yeah.
1700s,
Restoration of the
Restoration of the
old
old,
headstones and different things like
And,
that.
and that's another thing, I think we can get the momentum going back again. And I think we need to engage in community. We need the volunteer efforts. We need the people to take ownership in it and then come in and help and donate some money and we can re-engage that because I think that's an important element, especially to do things like that.
All right. Excellent. Good deal.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Oh,
it.
Thank you very much.
I handed out my presentation, so
Oh, good. We'll
I have copies.
circulate that to council.
thank you.
We'll put that in my week.
All right, next up on our agenda, developer request to form a NCA for Terra Alta and Stockdale Farms developments.
Yeah, let me just, a couple of comments as we lead into this item. The committee will recall that at its February meeting, we had a discussion about this because we've been, for the last probably year, this developer's been in the stage of developing the project. And one of the things they have talked to us about is the formation of the new community authority. Really would be more of a developer-initiated authority as opposed to a city-initiated authority like we did for the Glen Parkway project. Presents some policy challenges for us. We talked about it at the last meeting. The consensus seemed to be that there wasn't a lot of interest in proceeding at least with that model, that perhaps some of those costs and whatnot could be rolled into an HOA. I relayed that to David Fisher, who's one of the principals. He had asked for an opportunity to present to the committee, so They're here today. I provided you some of the background information they gave us, which is, really kind of a laundry list of costs that they've incurred that in a perfect world would be put into an NCA. In a not so perfect world, maybe not all those costs would go under. In a not so perfect world, the NCA doesn't get formed. But that's really, I think, if this is a policy question, ultimately for City Council. We thought it appropriate, because we had talked to you about it in February, that you get an opportunity to hear from them and have some dialogue back and forth about kind of the pros and cons and some of the policy questions. So that said, they're here.
Yep.
And I don't know who, I guess David.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. I'm David Fisher with Kepler Fisher, here on behalf of the developer team. I've also got a team with me. I've got Greg Stipe, who is our community authority bond counsel expert that does the legal structure behind these deals. You know Mr. Cutler, and you know Mr. Shade. And we had Marty Safko here earlier, but did he sneak out? He was in the back a little bit ago. So Marty's one of the members of the development team. So
Give us an address.
sure, 207 North 4th Street, Columbus, Ohio.
Excellent, thank you.
Great, thank you. Once again, David Fisher, thanks for the opportunity. And Tom did a great intro there, and he's absolutely right. We've been meeting, seems like at least a year, Tom, with you and David Eflin and some others to talk about what we're trying to accomplish out there. And I think it would be a good place to start to kind of talk about what we're accomplishing. I brought a couple of drawings along with me. As you recall, this started off years ago with a development known as Terra Alta, which is this Pollock Road here. This is the north end of the project, the new preservation parks up here. This was a piece of property that was annexed to the city by Mr. Shade years ago, and me and the development team zoned this into the city sometime thereafter. Meanwhile, Mr. Shade annexed the Stockdale Farm in, which is down here at Brawl and ultimately zoned that into the city. Meanwhile, we worked with the Rogers family over the years and acquired the centerpiece here. So now you have one combined development that will be known as Terra Alta. It will consist of about 800 lots. So by far, I think makes it the largest subdivision that's ever occurred in Delaware, doesn't it, Tom?
It's right up there in the top 5,
Right.
if not the top. And
I
Dave,
know.
I think, has indicated it's comparable, a little larger than the Glen Ross.
Yeah, I did Glen Ross years ago, and of course, with expansions that Dominion and Polte's done, it probably gets up there. But I think originally Glen Ross was about 400 lots, wasn't it, something like that. So this is a game changer for your city. Not only is it a lot of lots in a really interesting area. If you've been up there recently, it's a really dynamic piece of ground. If you get up there on the top and you're looking back over the city, it's a really cool area. But the development team has really, shall we say, rolled the dice hard on this. I mean, there's a lot of time, money, and effort invested in this. It's played well to the builder community in terms of a desire to build homes in here. We have met with Mr. Holman and Mr. Eflin and others on numerous occasions, and we've tried to address concerns the city had about things like move-up housing within the Delaware City School District and those sorts of things. So we've heard what you had to say. We are very excited about bringing this to the city. If this goes as we planned, we're talking about a lot of really nice new housing stock in the city of Delaware, and price points that are at the upper end of the scale, probably mid 350s at the bottom on up into the mid 400s and beyond. Stockdale could even go much higher than that. And then when we finally get to Rogers, which is that centerpiece, and that gets done, that will be some really expensive housing. If you're familiar with that track, you got a beautiful tree, a lot of topography in there, and that sort of thing. So that's what we're asking you to consider working with us on. You've done a great job so far working with us in terms of the zoning and annexations and those sorts of things. If you've been up there recently, you've also seen some pretty dynamic landscaping going on. Have any of you driven up in that area recently and seen the landscape that's occurring there? This is the main road coming up off of Pollock that shows you a little like a stone well house and that sort of thing. So once again, a signature development for the city of Delaware. And then finally, and this really goes in part to what we're talking about with the community authority, is the plan is to do some really beautiful, interesting clubhouses for the residents that live in that area. And these are just a couple of examples of the way those are going to look. And of course, if those of you who happen to have been around when we did the zoning or have reviewed it, there's also a series of walking paths and bike paths and trails and trying to preserve a lot of the old topography in there that was a part of that farm that was originally built. So now the community authority, and we appreciate your concerns. We appreciate your concerns for fiscal responsibility of the city and the concerns that we hear you've expressed about the economic needs of the city and things like income taxes and how does the community authority come into play with that. What we'd like to posit with you is that this community authority is unlike any other that you have done or considered in the city. This would not be a city-sponsored community authority. Under Ohio law, and Mr. Sipes can get into this in more detail, granted the city has to be a part of that just from a legal structure standpoint, and they would have a majority of the board members on it. But this is a developer-sponsored community authority. And what I want you to think about is to think about this more in terms of not a community authority that has a defined purpose, such as your Glen Parkway Community Authority that was designed to raise money to pay for Glen Parkway. But this community authority will really operate more like a master homeowners association in that it will defray things like the cost of these nice clubhouses, and there'll be 2 of them. It will defray costs of maintaining open spaces and parkland and bike paths and those sorts of things. And every resident that chooses to buy a home there will know going in up front that he or she is paying a community charge and what that charge is for. So unlike, I kind of hear the rumblings that the Glen Parkway Community Authority, where I guess you had some people saying, well, you know, everybody gets to use Glen Parkway, but I had to pay for it, and I live in the south end and people up there are using it. I'm not, nothing could be different than here, because the people that are part of this community authority, they know what they're paying for, and they know that they're getting what they're paying for. Additionally, by doing it this way, we're able to keep more cost effective the costs of these improvements and the cost of living in this development, because by the community authority owning all these facilities, there's some tax benefits to them and therefore the residents of the community. So for example, the community clubhouses we're talking about, there'll be 2 nice ones. If those were owned by a homeowners association, that homeowners association, even though it's a nonprofit corporation that doesn't have any profit motive, they have to pay real estate taxes on those.
So when you have a community authority, there would be no homeowner association.
There actually, Mr. Jones, there would be a much lower role. It would do things like elect people in your community and that sort of thing. But this would take its place. I will tell you, Mr. Sipes and I have worked on a couple of these. The most recent one that is a really good example of how well these work, if you're familiar with the big, what's known as Jerome Village development up outside of Dublin, we've done the same thing there. So unlike I'm just using an example, your Glen Parkway, where it was designed to say it's going to be for this many years to pay for this road. This is going to go on forever. It's going to be a homeowners association, and the people that live there are going to be able to make some choices about the upkeep and maintenance of their facilities through this. So it's a really interesting way to use the community authority law really for the benefit of the residents of the community that live there.
But is to back up, is really, because when I came into this, I was thinking, yeah, why don't you just do a homeowners association, private property assessment type tool. And really the advantage and what you're looking to get out of it is to negate real estate taxes.
In part, that's one of the many reasons.
What are the other reasons?
Well, it also helps fund the cost of development. So let me share with you, and I hope I don't offend you by saying this, so please understand that. We're all familiar with the geographics down there and the school district geographics, right? We're all familiar with that? So you've got, once again, Terra Alta at the top, Rogers, Stockdale. Terra Alta is in Delaware City Schools. Rogers and Stockdale are in Olentangy City Schools. Nobody's fault, just a fact. The developer tells me that if all of this was in Olentangy City Schools, they wouldn't need the community authority. That the home builder community and the buyer community will not pay to today for lots in Delaware City Schools and for homes in Delaware City Schools, what they'll pay for homes in Olentangy City Schools. It's simply a fact. And by the way, we have purchase contracts with home builders that support that. The point being, there's about a $30,000 differential per lot between the two. If we could do in Terra Alta what we can do in Stockdale and Rogers, the incremental value increase in terms of development, you wouldn't need the community before we get the deal done in terms of the cost of infrastructure of doing it. But I'd ask you to consider it this way. Once again, I hesitated to tell you that because I don't want to offend you. But it's a marketplace fact. But here's what I want you to consider is if this is done at the level we want to do it, we would submit that over time, it's going to help raise the awareness and the level and the standing of Delaware City Schools so that goes away over time. If you don't do that, and if you don't do it at the best level of quality, you can't accomplish that the same way. At least we would maintain that. So this is in some ways a partnership with the city to prime this development, to use this economic tool to allow this development to be built at the highest possible level. So for example, without the community authority, the developer will necessarily have to scale down the level of development and the amenities of the development, including those nice clubhouses. So for example, over time, does the city really get the greatest benefit out of this development by doing this? But in doing that, keep in mind that this doesn't cost the city a dime, doesn't take a dime of tax revenues away, and at the same time, it enhances the development in a way where people who live there are choosing to live there, and in choosing to live there are choosing to pay the community development charge. So to me, it's a big distinction. So we're trying to, and by the way, we recognize, in fact, it's interesting, we had a lot of discussions with Mr. Eflin and Mr. Holman early on in the discussion of this about the community development charge. And they kept pushing us to keep it at a rate not above your rate for Glen Parkway and others. We've conceded that fact because, like a homeowners association, which this is in a lot of ways, we've recognized that homeowners are only going to pay so much. They're going to pay so much to live somewhere. I mean, we all have costs of living and taxes and all those things we pay in our home ownership. So we've conceded that point. So I'd like to have.
Real quick, have you met with Paul Kraft?
Steve Puckler's met with Paul Kraft.
And the conversation went how from his standpoint?
Yes, if I may, Steve Cutler, Taft, Tenius, and Hollister, 94 North Sandusky Street. I don't know if you got that on the recording or not.
Okay.
Is that good? Is that loud enough? Yeah, so to answer your question, Councilman Jones, yes, I've met with Paul Kraft specifically on this project. Gave him some of the history. I was on council when Mr. Shade so eloquently brought this in and we annexed, and was also part of on council when we did the original development plans. So actually, Mr. Kraft is very excited about this because one of the challenges they have on the Delaware City Schools is that next step up housing. And I know I believe he's meeting with Tom tomorrow, and as I understand, it's going to be voicing support for this kind of for this concept, for what we're trying to do. So what, and I'll just back up from there, is what excites me about this, right? So as a council member, you look back and there's certain projects you were part of, and one was like Kroger Distribution Center was a big deal, and obviously that came in and boom, it happened, right? 911 consolidation sounds boring now, but that was a big deal. That happened. The Veterans Memorial, right? The help of all you and Jackie, right? That talked about that 10 years ago. Boom, it happened. Likewise, something like this is huge because when I was on council, the challenge back then in 2002 was, right, well, okay, you're living in a $200,000 house now. There's folks who want to stay in Delaware City Schools, but where do they move, right? There's a Northwest Neighborhood Association, right, or that area, excuse me. But outside of that, there's nowhere to move. There's no move up within the Delaware City Schools. So, so the argument and what council supported unanimously, if I recall correctly, this annexation and the development was because this was an opportunity to get some high-end move-up housing so folks can stay within Delaware City Schools. And I think it's fascinating, just some of the numbers on this. So, for example, the average, according to the Census Bureau, the average home value here in Delaware City is around $160,000, right? With this community authority, you'll have and I'm just speaking to the Delaware City portion of that bigger Terra Alta development. You're going to be looking at, $350,000 on up. The average income, according to the Census Bureau here in Delaware, is $54,000. The average income needed in order to get a mortgage for $350,000 home, you need $133,000 of household income to qualify for a $350,000 mortgage. So some of the numbers Mr. Stipe actually ran, and I'll just be real quick here, but I think is really good. So, and I shared this with Mr. Kraft. So for example, the property taxes, just again on the Delaware City portion, so the Delaware City schools would receive $3.3 million a year in real property taxes, just on obviously just on that portion of the Terra Alta project that's in Delaware City. So again, that would consist of roughly 370 single-family homes, and then the 136 condominium sites, which are targeted towards seniors. And so when you do the math and all that kind of stuff, and the ratios they use per kid per house, right, that comes out pretty good for them, right? And then likewise, using the median income, right, if you based on population, and then you use the average income of the census, let's just assume, we're not going to assume they have $133,000 household income. Let's just assume, be conservative, they have a $54,000 income. Just the Delaware City portion, the income tax on estimated full build out by 2028, you're looking at $500,000 in income tax. Again, that's conservative, right? Just based on those lower end numbers, just on the Delaware City portion. And then you extrapolate that over the larger Terra Nova project, get into the Olentangy schools, higher end homes, higher incomes, et cetera. This is exactly what we envisioned when we annexed this and approved this kind of thing. So really exciting. It's real proud to, to actually be part of this. And, I pick my clients, right. I use a lot of caution and very proud to be with Mr. Safko, Mr. Romanelli. Those are two high-class, five-star guys that are coming in front of you.
Sure, I've got a question. So originally when we talked about this at the last meeting, our concern was, the developer, in order to put these amenities in, needs this extra money. We said, well, why not charge more for the houses? So I understand now your concerns about, you've got houses that sell one right here, one right there. So that all makes sense. My question is a couple things. Is this going to encompass that entire subdivision or just the portion that's in?
All 800 lots.
Okay. And is there a termination date on this, or is this going to run forever?
As a homeowners association, will run forever. Now, over time, it's financial needs. You can't ever go up above the maximum charge. But over time, if the residents decide, we want to build a new clubhouse, we want to build a new pool, they could agree to charge themselves accordingly to pay for that.
So once these amenities are paid for through this, assuming that whatever this amount that you're charging is, once these amenities are paid for, where's that money going after that?
Well, then it gets reduced, then the charge reduces.
That's my question.
Right. It reduces, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Stipe's really the expert on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, real quick, so you have Terra Alta, then Rogers, then Stockdale. So this is, did you say earlier it was supposed to all become Terra Alta then?
Yeah.
And then which portion would be built first, the Delaware City Schools portion or?
Delaware City Schools.
Correct.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
That's the first portion.
Which is well under construction right now.
Perfect.
It's a great addition to our city. I just want to make sure I understand it.
No, absolutely.
Just to look fair to the citizens that are going to be living there, and that your explanation makes sense. It's going to taper off once those amenities are paid for. So.
Absolutely.
Or once again, Mr. Schaefer, if that community 20 years from now says, we want to build a new pool and we want to build a new clubhouse, they can elect to charge themselves more for that.
Sure.
But yeah, there's not just money sitting there that is being charged for
nothing.
Right. And I believe 100% what Mr. Lewis said about this changing the perception of the school system too.
That was always the.
And what we want you to really focus on with this community authority is that doing it allows us to build at this high quality level, which enhances all those opportunities for the city and its residents and its schools. That the community authority is the engine that allows us to make that happen.
So I guess to that point, Dave, and we've had this discussion, and councils sees this in the planning plats and plans they have to approve, but Pulte was in here less than 3 months ago for approval for a new clubhouse, a new pool. They just put a new clubhouse and pool in on Cheshire Road as part of that project. That's all part of their financing. It's all part of it, goes into the cost of the homes and probably into the HOA charges as well. What makes that different than this?
By the way,
Maybe the land cost is less?
there's a very easy answer to that. Pulte is a really fine company. But through the acquisition of Dominion Homes and through the 2008 meltdown, they have absolutely no basis in that land. They paid literally nothing for that land. So you remember the example I gave you earlier, I said if everything was Stockdale and in Olentangy City Schools, we wouldn't need to, this is all an economic equation. So Pulte has an extremely low basis in all that ground. All Olentangy schools, they're able to build that into development cost. We're simply not able to put amenities in at the level we're proposing that we're going to do them, which we think benefits the city, its residents, and the schools without some help. And it's all economic based. Pure and simple.
You know, a number of years ago, when I was a much younger attorney, Michael Shea, 202 North Washington Street, Delaware, Ohio. Some people in town think that I was in the same class as Moses Bixby, but that was not true. You know, and I've been involved in these projects at one stage or the other for a very, very long time. I had a meeting with the late Irving Schottenstein, and in that meeting it came up, the only question that he asked was, is this property in Olentangy schools or is it in Delaware City schools? And he says, because if it's in Delaware City schools, I'm not interested. And he said that at that point in time, that's where their markets were going to be. And being a graduate of Delaware City schools, I took issue with it. And I said, you know, and I told him some of the history about my class, my graduating class, which has never been surpassed in Delaware. We had 8 National Merit Scholarship finalists. We had 4 people in our class that had perfect scores on the SATs, 4 people that missed one point or another on the SATs. And he, as he was, always kind. He said, Mike, it's all about perception. And in this particular situation, the largest portion of this 800-unit development is in Delaware City schools. And I called up the other day when I started to look at these numbers, and you know, I had the auditor make the calculations on various levels, and we ended up being about 375, and that would generate to the Delaware City schools, just on the northern portion in the city of Delaware, about 3.6 million. It's not that I disagree with the expert, but that was the raw number. Now there's factors that go into that may change those numbers a little bit. And if you look at the raw numbers, I back it in another way. I look at what what you have to put down. Very few people on a $400,000 house to meet the 20% requirement, $8 grand. Can't do that. So there's other charges that they have to carry and stuff like that. The reality is we're looking at potentially about $921,000 in income taxes. We're looking at the city share just of the property taxes at about $70,000. Now this land was brought in under an expedited type 2. So it's one of those situations where we have to split the Delaware Township. But then you look at the impact fees that are generated by this, $930,000, just on the 450 houses. We're looking at just sewer and water capacity fees of just a little under $5 million. The numbers, and that's what we need to start looking at as a community, is the numbers that these developments generate. And this, we get the extra plus, that's something all of us have. When I was on city council, when I was mayor, we were all trying to get, when Steve was on, we were always trying to see what we could do to raise the price of the housing stock in the city of Delaware. All of our chief executives didn't live here. The only chief executive we had in town that lived here was the president of the university. That's because his housing was provided.
In the hospital.
So this is a most unusual set of circumstances. As we were preparing for the meeting today, I just pulled up one of the lots in this section, 19.4 acres. Had a tax value of $414,000. Based on just the raw cost of building that at that $375,000, that land went from $414,000 to $5.9 million. So there is a real significant impact. No one's pulling the wool over anybody's eyes here. You have to sit here and you have to think, okay, we have a situation. We've told you, if this could be all in Olentangy School, but that's not doing our community any good. We can't show difference between Olentangy because we have a lot of citizens in Olentangy. We have a lot of citizens in the city of Delaware. I'm very proud of the Delaware City Schools. It's been my privilege to represent them on their land acquisitions throughout this community. This is an important play for everybody. But developers will stop being a part of our community if they can't get a reasonable return and they cannot provide what they think the customers, they do their homework. Developers do their homework. They know what their markets are going to bear, and they've got to sell it. And you cannot sell, this is a beautiful hunk of ground. So some of the best in the city, in the county, in all three tracts. But they all present different problems, and they all have difficulties. When we looked at this property, the Stockdale Farms, we've gone through 3 different pathways for just the utilities. We were told when we brought this into the city of Delaware, oh, we're going to run those utilities right up the street. Then we were told that, well, we think we can solve a couple problems here. And we're going to take the Stockdale Farms portion, and we're going to reroute Berlin Station Road through the middle of it and run it on the bridge across the road. That didn't happen. And the amounts, the millions of dollars that have been spent getting to this stage of the game is almost mind-boggling. And if it helps the developer recover, I have always talked to city council. In my 2008, I even brought a copy of it about my concerns about development going forward. And it hasn't lessened. It has not lessened. In the 2008 study that I did on 3 developments here in the community, we had developers cost at $13,000 a lot. Today, we're looking at $38,000 to $45,000 a lot. It's almost mind-boggling how much things have gone up. Material costs. Even in the houses, the materials have gone up. So we've got to go to what I've always thought needed to be done. We have to form a partnership between the development community and, because they're the risk takers. You're a risk taker too, but not in the same sense. It's their money. We have to do something that keeps this community moving forward. And housing is a very important part of it. Tomorrow, I am selling my home after 33 years, same location. Because I'm tired of sitting in my house by myself in 33,000 square feet of house.
33,000
Dang.
square feet, that's a.
No, 30.
Where does Mike live?
I live in,
mayor's mansion.
my house is 3,000 square feet. I've lived there for 33 years. But I'm gonna live here in Delaware. It's just a different lifestyle now change. So, but it doesn't mean that we don't care, that we won't support. I'm proud to say, as a graduate of Delaware Hayes and as a citizen of this community since 1954, I've never voted no on a levy or a tax levy for this community. I believe that strongly in it. And unlike my partners who live in different areas, they represent clients that are willing to make an investment, and we have to meet them halfway. That's the bottom line. If we can't start to do this stuff and we can't start thinking outside the box, it's going to get tougher and tougher. You've always been willing to talk density, but it's more than that now because the numbers are changing, dynamics are changing.
Let me suggest, I know we've taken a lot of your time today. Mr. Stipe is here. He's the expert on this.
Yeah.
Would you like him to talk a little bit about the way this is structured? Okay, great.
Sure.
You come up and.
Greg Stipe with Barnes and Thornburg, 41 South High Street, Columbus. I've been involved in new community authorities going back to the original new community authority of the modern era in New Albany. And know the folks who drafted the original new community authority statute. And while it's a very broad and flexible statute, it's important to focus on the kinds of things we've talked about, how it would be applied here for this development. So just headline kinds of items. We've already discussed, Mr. Homan pointed out, this is a developer-initiated community authority. That's more in line with what's been done in New Albany. That's in line with what's been done in Jerome Village. That's in line with what's been done down at the Jeffrey site in Columbus, as opposed to a community authority that was initiated from the public side with a much broader scope in mind, which is what your Glen Road Authority is or what the River South Authority is in downtown Columbus. So in New Albany, Jerome Village, those are the developer-initiated community authorities. It's focused on internal improvements, and as David and others have pointed out, those are improvements that will directly benefit the residents here. And they'll know about the community authority charge and the amenities on the way in the door. We do intend, to the maximum extent possible, that this community authority would pick up HOA functions. And some of our other community authorities, the North Star Authority at 3637, one of the notions is that it has a capital financing capacity to begin with, but at the end of the day, you end up with these parts and pieces of land and other things that are your open space, and they come into the community authority's ownership. And you're never going to borrow right up to the line of what the community authority charges are, so that bit that's left over in the short term becomes the amount that's there for operation and maintenance. And then over time, once your capital is paid off, that gets lowered, but you can maintain the operation and maintenance function. I've seen dazzling arrays of homeowners associations stacked one upon the other, and we think this is an opportunity to simplify and consolidate in that regard. And I think finally, to emphasize the point that was made earlier, this is developer supported, developer administered, and it's fully developer financial risk. At the end of the day, the developer is going to put the money in up front, and we'll have financial structures that will make it possible for the developer to recover that cost over time, assuming this is a successful development. So all the risk is on their side of the table. And in these kinds of authorities that are developer initiated, the responsibilities of the treasurer function and the administrative function. Yes, it's a public body, but those responsibilities, in my experience, have always been picked up by the developer support side of things, and they do that as just part of moving forward with the development. I appreciated Mr. Shad's comments about the differences in our figures. I'm just one of those bond lawyers who always likes to make my figures as conservative as possible, and that's why we started with low income and other things. We all like to think that you start low and you can exceed that bar, but I did calculate, it looked like about $500,000 a year in income tax on Delaware school district portion. And then for the Delaware schools, it was about 3.3 million. I was using home values that were slightly lower than the home values that Mike was using. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to this myself, but a new community authority, does that charge like an HOA, like a monthly, quarterly charge, or is that rolled to a price of a house?
Those are one of the great benefits in terms of simplifying administration and overlay of one upon another, is that the new community authority customarily puts its charge on the tax roll. It sets it once a year, certifies it to the county auditor, it gets put through and collected.
Okay.
There are community authorities where people said, no, we'll do it ourselves. But I think that's one of the great advantages, and with that comes effectively the security of a financial flow that's on the tax bills.
I mean, to that point, this is one of the things we raised very early on that we're challenged with right now with our existing new community authorities, in particular the Southern New Community Authority, because most of that is residential at this point. The Northern is Mill Run Crossing, Myers, and the Quail Pass residential development. What's happened is residents aren't aware when they buy the house. They're aware that they're in the Olentangy School District, and their school district taxes are going to be this, but they don't realize that they're also going to pay a township tax because of the way the annexation was done, and they don't realize necessarily that they're going to pay an NCA charge. I copied council on a note I sent last week to a lady that had called me from the Southern New Community Authority area saying, what's this charge? It's $1,500 a year. What's it for? Well, it's for this public good that we built. It's for a big parkway project, which was part of this, part of that. They don't always distinguish that. And I understand in this case, it's for enhancements within the project, but I'm not so sure the residents will necessarily make that distinction.
New residents?
New residents in the Terra Alta.
See, I think the opposite. I think they'll know going into it, so.
That's what you're telling us.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
Well, no, there's no.
We're obligated to disclose that in the land sale.
So are the so are the new community, the Southern New Community. I think what I'd be interested in understanding a little more. I mean, you have to, if council, if the finance committee is inclined to kind of take the next step and look at this, I think you have to look at the cost that they're asking that the NCA be included. A lot of this is stuff that we typically require, whether it's wider streets and things like that, versus enhancements to make it more marketable, which are entryway features, walking paths, clubhouses, things like that. So, but I'd be interested in knowing a little more about the difference between the HOA estimated charge for a subdivision like a Terra Alta versus what the charge might be. And I don't expect you to know that.
I'm not far along.
Yeah, but it would be.
But the home association charge will be significant.
Well, I would think there wouldn't be one.
Well, there'll be a minor one. What you could have, because of the size of this community, you could have, for example, an area that's a gated community in there that maybe those people pay assessment for their gates into their neighborhood and things like that. Be very minor compared to what you otherwise would have with an HOA. It's more, HOA becomes more of a governance document as opposed to a charging document.
But wouldn't your HOA then also continue to be responsible for your operating costs?
No, that'll all be done through.
So that would also, so even your landscaping is all
be done through
comes out of the NCA funds?
That'll all come out of the community authority.
Versus, like if I'm in a Stratford Woods development, my HOA fees pay for the mulch and the flowers and the new sign every few years. And
Here's the NCA.
Pardon?
That's it.
Yes, in this case, I think what you're saying is the NCA, which.
There might be
But I'd just be
some
curious about this.
variation to that, but generally, the NCA is gonna own those.
Let me just jump in.
You do have
Yeah,
a
I mean,
two-tier
just-
system here where when you got, trying to get the levy passed, you had people saying, I'm already paying.
Right, yeah, let me-
And that's what we have to, that's all that we have to weigh.
If I could jump in, if I may, Chairman.
Mhm.
So again, Steve Kuckler. So I think I'm a perfect example because I've lived in a community with an NCA, right? When we moved to POW, right, we moved to Gulf Village. Gulf Village has a 10 mil NCA, right? This one we're talking about a 7.5. And in that case, I think it's two important things, right? Everybody going in, that was fully disclosed on all the contracts, right? It was like, hey, here's your property tax and here's what you're estimating. Here's your estimated property tax. Here's your estimated NCA. So everybody going in knew there's an extra charge. But we were willing to do it because of the community, closeness to Kinsale, the golf courses, the streets, all the awesome stuff, because it was truly a community into itself. So we're willing to pay a little bit more for the houses, plus pay a little more on the community charge. I would add another thing too, is lots been said as well, if you have a charge, there's some interest, there might be some pushback on a levy. And I appreciate that, right? I'm a political guy, so I get all that kind of stuff. But I think it's interesting just to look at the facts is if you look at in POW where we've had income tax levies and those income tax levies have failed. But if you look at the areas of the income tax levy where it passed, it was in Gulf Village. Gulf Village is nearly almost a half in terms of population of the city of POW. But yet if you look at breakdown of various levies, it's always Gulf Village that carries the levies. It's the older parts of POW where people have retired, right, and don't want to pay any more income tax, right? It's the newer communities with the young families, the young professionals who just got married and now have young kids move in. Yeah, they're paying NCA, but we want a great community. So heck yeah, we're going to pay for that tax. So I would say on the flip side, my experience with these types of communities, they're the type of communities actually will be on the forefront, the tip of the spear, if you will, of advocating for road levies or whatever you might have. So that's just my personal experience.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to answer you, from my perspective, Tom, that's your question is I absolutely want to move forward into this process. I personally think, since I've, when I first built my house and everything, this is the conversation I've had with my neighbors is, where do we go from here? We bought a starter house, where do we go now? Now the kids they're not so little, they're taking up more space, they need more yard, they need a bigger house. It's always been a topic of conversation. And I think the difference between what you asked about, Pulte and this is, I agree, this is to help marketing, but I think it's marketing for the city of Delaware, for the city schools, my personal opinion. I mean, it's like, the old urban, or the old, what they call urban flight back in the day, everyone, sometimes I feel that we have that here in Delaware City. It's like, call it the Southern Delaware County flight, because that's what, we still struggle with this all the time with economic development. A lot of people are working out of the city and they want to stay in Delaware, but they got nowhere else to go. So then we're losing that tax revenue. We're losing, I'm behind this 100%.
Yeah, I'm glad to, obviously, we need all the details.
Absolutely.
I'm glad to support it. So I think it makes sense.
By the way, I was thinking about the disclosure issue. It's interesting, I just thought about this sitting here. The standard real estate purchase contract in central Ohio now that everybody that buys a house in Delaware uses, you must disclose if you're selling home to the community.
Or an authority, what that.
So nobody comes in without knowing today. There was a time in the early infancy of community authorities that wasn't the case. But also, once again, this is internal for development. People are going to be told coming in, you're going to be paying this charge.
Dave, would you be able to follow up? I'm sure you would, in terms of if you were looking at an HOA, how that gets, I don't know how the developer determines what an HOA cost is. But if I'm buying a $400,000 home.
Yeah, we've got some experience with that. Once again,
It'd be helpful to know.
Jerome Village and North Star, we have combined
versus
HOAs and community authorities.
versus what it would be in an NCA charge. Right. If it's $1,000 a year versus $300 a year is something. If it's 1,000 versus 800.
I can assure you that the all-in cost is lower generally from an HOA charge standpoint for a variety
No, I hear
of reasons,
that.
not the least of which is this whole real estate thing. And Mr. Hellinger, let me explain this to you, because I'm not saying we're trying to take big real estate tax dollars out of the community and all the different levies. But a perfect example is years ago, I did a development out of New Ulm. It was New Ulm Links Country Club, New Links Golf Course. In that community, and by this kind of comes back to Mr. Holman's point about people knocking on your door for things and calling you on the phone. In that development, there are probably 50, if not more, little areas like entrance features, little landscape beds where a street comes in that are all owned by the homeowners association. About 15 years in, the residents who then had taken over the homeowners association got mad and went ahead. It wasn't the sheer magnitude of the tax bill. It was the theory that this is not usable land for us. It's a little, third of an acre plot at the corner of a street that somebody mows, and it's the entrance to our neighborhood. Why are we paying tax on this? We're a nonprofit corporation. Well, the issue is because an HOA nonprofit corporation has to pay real estate tax on its property holdings. So the community authority is a beautiful way to basically avoid that sort of nuisance that I would maintain over the years. People, because I can tell you what happened at Walney Lakes. All those people didn't knock on the door, they literally beat the door of the city to say, we want you to take all these on because this isn't right, that we have to pay for this. These are little community features that the whole community enjoys. So, just an interesting thought. I want to explain that because I know you were kind of puzzled by that whole real estate discussion. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
One of the things that you can't lose sight of is that this particular piece of ground, the part that's in the city of Delaware, the topography issues and things like that, that are going to keep large spaces open. If we were looking at this at a 2.5 density, which is not uncommon in the city of Delaware, we would be at 635 housing units. We're talking 450. The dynamics can change on that, but you still have to deal with the developable ground that you have. In this case, there's a lot of land that is being lost. It will be used and it will be a benefit to the community, but it doesn't help the developer.
Well, and that's exactly why we're here. We're trying to put forth and develop a first-class community that everybody can be proud of, and we simply need your help to accomplish that. It is really as simple as that. So we appreciate your time.
Just a couple comments, and having been with the city for quite some time, even remembering back when Mike was mayor, this development, I think it always has been one of those. It's been one of these things we've been trying to get into the community. There's nothing about what you're saying about your development that I don't think most people wouldn't agree with, and we've been trying for quite some time. One of the biggest reluctance, and it's much to do with what you're doing or how you're doing it, is some of the issues, realities we've got to deal with. The new community authorities, when they came out, it became a developer-driven type of thing to kind of offset upfront infrastructure cost and have a way to, have that change the selling price of the house because, it's a little bit different. So again, not comparing it, but I get an ungodly amount of calls from people in that community authority, and how many times I have to explain to them that, but for this, you would have paid $20,000 more for your house or whatever else. It was just the economics of how that all played out, regardless of what school district you're in. But the challenge in where a lot of these others were in place, where they started New Albany, you mentioned that, Greg, I think the first one or wherever you're working on, Gulf Village, Jerome Village, the dynamics are different. Those communities don't have the challenges we have, tax rates, ability to maintain those roads you're going to build. One of our challenges, and council has to wrap their hands around, but fundamentally, if we don't address, and we've been trying from when Mike was on council, looking at our road resources available to maintain that infrastructure. We can deal with the water, the sewers, and whatever else, because we can pass along costs and whatever else. But we're going to be in a predicament in 15, 20 years if we don't get some sort of a road levy passed. Those nice houses you're building, people are going to be all over future council members, and you guys will be like Steve and Mike back there. Because we can't resurface the road and have money to do it. The biggest challenge, and that's a lot of the gist of the previous discussion, and again, not that that's not your issue, is this dynamic of that we don't have a resource base rate. We don't have the tax rates that New Albany, the city of Columbus even does, Dublin's and what, they didn't have to worry about that element of it. On your own, again, it's a tough, so you weigh all those positives. You mentioned the school district, and there's one thing you didn't mention. I remember previous superintendents having dealt with. One of the other advantages of getting the upscale a little bit higher end housing is their test scores. Sometimes, maybe people don't like to acknowledge it, but go up, not because they've done anything with their teachers and how they teach their curriculum, but sometimes you can increase. There's no dynamics about what's occurred in the Olentangy School District. You know, Mike, 30 years ago, what if they've been having the same dialogue about the cost of the value of land for houses in the Olentangy School District versus Delaware City? They probably would have been more costly in Delaware City than Olentangy, and things do change. Whether that'll change in 15, 20 years, I don't know. You know, a lot of things out there with land prices, we know that it costs less for raw land in Delaware City than Olentangy. And you guys are right on the border. And I think we've recognized that all along, because you're going to somewhat be competing with selling the houses with just down the road. But the biggest challenge becomes where we're kind of in a predicament. And that's why they have to really think about these things. You know, if our tax rate was if that tax would have passed, or was that, this really discussion probably wouldn't even be occurring. Or if it would, it'd be a little bit different light. And somehow we have to, you know, that's what council has to weigh out a lot of the positives, which you all communicate, I think, pretty effectively. What does that mean in a bigger global issue down the road? Because the people do, and they look at it, and it can be problematic. My niece built a house in the area down there in the Olentangy School District in the city of Delaware, had an NCA. They sold their house. One of the reasons why was because they're paying this NCA charge. They work in areas, Columbus or whatever else, they have to pay this because Delaware doesn't give full credit, and it becomes a challenge. That's real. That's what we have to deal with, and we have to look at that in bigger scheme of things. But if along those lines, and that's why I think, you know, there was some discussion, maybe Tom passed along this notion, and I know you have to put it in a disclosure, and yeah, people do that, but you know, at the end of the day, they end up talking, call it out here because they're asking what this is. Well, it was in your disclosure sort of thing. If there's a way somehow that this can be structured, it still accomplish the same thing. Somehow it's got to, you know, hopefully it's not, and maybe Steve's right, that the people that build here will be supportive of road levies. It's not been the case in our situation, and you know, again, but Golf Village is different. Golf Village is probably different than maybe what this might be too. So that's a real challenge. I'm not speaking for council, but for that issue, I think it'd be a little bit different, a lot different dialogue.
Those are always issues that we will face as a community. What we're talking about is something that won't, you know, we still have to make the sale. We still have to convince people to do that. Here, this has nothing to do with road levies and things like that. This is a private new community authority that is going to provide the amenities to make that possible to get more income, higher incomes into the city of Delaware. You know, a person will not be able to afford this house, as Steve pointed out. They will not be able to afford this house if they have an income under a certain level. You still got to carry that mortgage. You still got to make those payments. The problem with us is in this community is that sometimes it's very hard to sell. It's very hard to sell. And to the contrary, and Tom knows this because we've had this conversation. I was opposed to the last levy. I voted for it, but I was opposed because it wasn't large enough. You cannot make the capital improvements we need in this community at 0.15%. We can't even pay for the improvement on Central Avenue at 1.15.
But that reality exists, Mike, and we've tried multiple times. And when you look at it in a broader sense, the weighing the pros and the cons part of it, unfortunately, is this an add or a subtract? And unfortunately, and it may not be in this situation, there are the people down, we went to the community of associations and whatever else, and they weren't, again, and I talk to them on the phone because they call all the time, all the time, and want to understand why. But
What else do we have on this? I mean, we're going far afield on
I think
this.
the one thing that would be helpful is to understand, and I know you're working with Dave with this right now, is the price points and sizes of the homes in the city school district. Because I know that's changing, or it has changed a couple of times. Just where they're placed, it'd just be helpful to know. I've got a meeting tomorrow with the superintendent. I'm going to relay to him, our discussion. We've been keeping him aware of this, but what we want, I think, to understand is, because I know there's been some changes to how large those homes look, and that would be helpful for me.
Yeah, there's some marketing changes in terms of lot sizes, but that doesn't impact the home price.
No, whatever, it'd just be good to know, I think, as we move ahead, if council wants to analyze this more, and I assume you do,
Sure.
that would be good to know. And if somebody says, well, what are the sizes of those homes? I know they're $400,000, but they're only 1,500 square feet. That's different than their 3,500 square feet.
Well, I will tell you that the current plans, the early phases of Terra Alta, which are the ones under development right now, those are more designed for the empty nester cohort of the population, which I hope you find is a good idea because it would pump a lot of money into your schools with no kids to educate. But there's plenty of area left in Delaware City schools. And I think we went over this one day with you, Tom. There's plenty of area left that will be more family style housing. It's further towards Broadmoor, towards Berlin Station. But the first phase is designed more. And once again, first of all, that's what the market is right now. But secondly, I think your school district could love it because the dynamics of schools with levies and with real estate taxes is, thanks for all the real estate tax dollars, but now I got to educate all these kids. So we basically prime the pump with these first areas by providing a lot of dollars to the school district with very few kids to educate. But over time, there's going to be plenty of housing stock in Terra Alta and the Delaware City schools to provide.
Well, that'd be helpful to see.
Yeah, and I think if we get more information,
Yeah.
we can further evaluate this and.
I know, by the way, we appreciate all the time you give us. I do want to respond to a couple of comments Mr. Seltzer made. I understand your comments. It's interesting in other areas where we've done community authorities, Greg, we haven't all these phone calls coming into the governmental entity because you have been getting them because you have a governmental sponsored community authority. But in these other communities, those calls come to the developer who runs the community authority. Secondly, I'll give you New Albany in terms of, we know there's a lot of money out in New Albany, but I will tell you the Jerome Village project is in Union County, Jerome Township. They have a lot more fiscal issues and problems than the city of Delaware has, and road network maintenance upkeep, because those are either township or county roads. So they are dealing with those issues, but I can tell you in that venue, this community authority has worked well and has been welcomed with open arms by all governmental authorities. They see it as a good thing for the very reasons we started this presentation with, which is they prime high scale, high quality development with good housing stock, which is what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. We've been at this for not just a long time today, but for an awful lot of years up there. You guys have been around, you've seen my face for a long time. We just need your help to get us over the finish line on this. It really is a simple.
We'll follow up on this and we appreciate your time.
So Tom, will you kind of report back to us? Meanwhile, we'll start gathering some of this information.
Yeah, that would be
talk about next steps. Correct.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Appreciate it, guys. Okay.
All right, so let's take 5 minutes and.
And I need to be out of here. So I'll get away.
Yeah, well.
Okay. Take a sip.
This is all just.
This is just
What am I
So,
looking at?
so anyway, since we're going ahead and we're doing the
Second
Cohatch renovation,
Mhm.
what I,
On the title page. The title block.
I'm sorry,
You good?
what you're looking at is the second floor of the City Hall Annex. So I thought that, with the need of, we had purchased the City Hall Annex as a protective purchase, the Gazette building, a number of years ago. We now have Cohatch and we have their contractors in there doing the work and their designers. That if I reached out to their architects, I had them do just a simple floor plan and do some cost of construction estimates. And if the idea is to eventually move the planning department, which seems to be the most, I've done numerous floor plans and ideas about what could go over there and use that second floor. It seems the best use would be planning. With planning over there, it would give the citizens and their customers more direct access to them. We have a pinch point here at this window where we have people coming to see Tom, contractors with, big plans, and they're laying them out the desk, things of that nature. So it just seems that planning could be over on the second floor. Council has already approved the connector bridge. The architect has given me some basic, just some estimates of what it costs of construction. It's about $35 a square foot. And the reason that it's not $60 a square foot, which is usually what it is, or it is now, is because Titan is already there. And they already have contractors that are going to be doing exactly the same work. And Red is there, and also Brand Stamp is there. Those are the three, the designers and the contractors. So as you'll read in my memo, and I know that Ken's needs to get going, but if you read on my memo, the staff is really hoping for the Finance Committee support in moving this project forward, mostly because of the economies of scale. If we wait 2 or 3 years, we're going to be paying $60 a square foot easy. And if we're going to do this, we should probably move forward. The urgency is that they need to get, because Cohatch has already started, we need to get plans done, because we can't hold up the contractor. That's part of this deal, is the reason we're getting this good deal is we don't hold them up. And like I was telling Tom, I think it was Tom, that the idea would be to have the similar kind of amenities or such that's on the first floor of Cohatch carrying up to the second floor, because if Cohatch ever leaves, then the building looks like one complete building. It doesn't look like a governmental building.
It's very
Cohatch,
cohesive.
right?
Yeah.
So what we would do with the extra space up here is we would bring DAS upstairs, who DAS reports directly to me, so it would be helpful for that. And also because our customers are the same. And, we have a real problem with shortness of conference rooms in this building. I just had a meeting yesterday where I had to get help setting up tables because I had 15 people meeting and we had to meet in here. It's the only space. And so it'll give us more conference rooms. It'll help us serve our CMO and attorney and economic development. That group of people will help us serve them better as well.
Well, because of DAS then?
My thought is we're going to put 2 conference rooms down there.
Okay, that makes sense.
Just gives us the conference room space. It's really the first enlargement of the City Hall office space in 96. You did this?
94.
94, so it's,
Makes sense. 24 years.
It's worked out for a while.
Right.
So, and this is just a preliminary plan. Dave's, I talked to Dave briefly. Basically what happened is I told Red Architects less than a week ago, can you lay something out for me? I need to take it to Finance Committee to get an idea of what, if you want us to move forward with this, taking it to council. And so he cranked it out pretty fast. It's not necessarily how, but it has all the mechanics, all the costs are there. So what we have is City Hall Annex renovation, including FF&E, is $185,000. We do have asbestos on the roof and a little bit on the second floor, so that's $30,000. City Hall renovations is just a small kind of $25,000, because we're just not going to be moving that much. And then we want to make sure our security alterations, especially coming off the connector bridge, and up here with the window, we want to make sure that's those areas are continue to be secure. So that is my proposal. I apologize you didn't have this information, but I got it last night, and you have it now. And I certainly would entertain any questions you might have.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah,
Our
I mean, yeah,
next-
this is almost a no-brainer. in my mind.
The piece we need to figure out is where's the money come from?
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got municipal impact fees that we're dedicating to some of this.
Put NCA in for that.
Yeah, I'm not
Well,
asking
they're gonna
for
build
anything
85
like
houses
that.
a year for the next 10 years, that's another 30,000.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, never know. What's another mill here or there?
So that's got to be, we've got to look at that. It might require a supplemental, but I think we really, the issue now is we've got a contract. We want to take advantage of the.
Well, right now, it
Absolutely.
doesn't require supplemental. We could appropriate $1.8
Right.
million, whether you realize or not.
She's right, though. We weighed the per square foot cost is gonna double for sure.
Cool.
You gotta pay stuff back,
You
you
make a
gotta.
motion on this to take it to council?
Dean, so we
Well, I
don't
thought the
need a
one-
supplemental?
Well, with your latest numbers, you keep changing them. No, just not really, but you did bump up the one after the last.
I
What we
did.
have appropriated, well, in the capital plan, I correct myself. We had $1.8 million somewhat targeted towards the improvements. I think we will need to change the appropriation.
Okay, and so,
So we probably want to bring something to you at the May 14th
I
meeting.
mean,
is that
So I
the
mean,
next
if there's,
meeting?
So what recommendation
Yeah, that's the
from
next
this group then?
I'm sorry?
You need a recommendation from finance then?
I mean, I just
Although,
wanted,
just let me,
Yeah.
the supplemental they approved had $615,000. That just covered in that? Other than the Cohatch 1.125, it also had you changed it to
yeah,
615.
it was, the Cohatch had the 11856 plus the 615, which
Well,
is
just
also
name,
ours.
Yes.
Right, is that,
Is this in that?
is in that?
No, no.
that's
this
right.
is
That
also-
included the structure.
included the
That included
bridge.
the things that just make it ready
Yeah,
at some
the-
point.
the
But
windows
This
and
is
that kind of
actually
stuff.
making it, so we can occupy.
This is a punch
We need
out.
another
Yeah.
$245,000.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
And then-
That-
then we would. I assumed it was in the 615.
What do you guys want to make?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we recommend the council approval of $245,000 for the renovations.
Second.
Roll?
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Jones?
Yes.
Chairman Hellinger?
Yes.
I appreciate that. I have to run to another meeting, so I'm going
Everybody's running.
Everybody's running. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Jackie. All right, what's next up on our hit parade list? Updates.
Just real quickly on the CIP, we've started earlier this year. Actually, we had the second meeting today of kind of pre-planning for the 2019, 2023 CIP. We tend to get jammed up. August 15th comes really quickly. And so we're starting actually in April with some pre-planning workshops. So the first draft, that's going to be due on June 8th. We're coming up with a new template that'll hopefully be a little easier for council to understand.
Good.
Impact fees, I received yesterday the final version, I hope, of the impact fee report. That will probably get woven into the CIP in terms of what those different impact fees are for. And then as part of my budget recommendation, I'm going to recommend that we adopt those fees. It might be sooner than beginning of the year. You might want to start that process. But the feedback that I got at the work session from council is, I think, general support for those. They haven't been raised in a number of years.
We talk about phasing those in.
Yeah, I think that the question would be, do you adopt them? So right now, the fees that you have are 90% of what was recommended back in the early 2000s. You don't have to take them up to 100%. You could adopt it, or you could do it over a period of time. But I think we'd give you some options.
That last 10% to go back to that you're talking about, or
No, for the new, so the current fees that we're charging, the $1,200
Oh,
for
okay.
parks
Okay.
is really 90% of what the consultant recommended
Okay.
several years ago.
Okay, I'm with you.
To your point, Kent, you could phase it. You could say it's gonna.
We talked about phasing.
Step them in.
What's that?
Phase, you said.
We talked about that, I think, yeah.
Yeah, so that.
And that's
hopefully
kind
we
of
can do that.
strategizes along with whatever
Right.
levies we might.
A lot of this ties back to how they're being used, what's the plan for using them.
Just one real quick question, not to elongate this, but park impact fees. Can park impact fees be used on the cemetery?
ask that same question?
I don't think so, because when we calculated those park impact fees in terms of how the calculations, I don't think it was included in terms of the available park acreage that we had, and there's no playscape.
Because that would be
You
very
really have anything to do with the
interesting.
calculation, because it has to do with what the utilization of it, an expanding park, and that's a pretty broad definition of what a park can be. It can be a passive park. So if we have an area up there that we let just grow up in whatever else, is that considered parkland? You know, is the cemetery or their amenities that are out there? I think
Okay.
most
Can we get a
definitions
clarification on
probably-
Yeah, it would be helpful
Could,
if
I
we could just get that clarified to know,
Legality of that?
especially, as- yeah, these
One of the
other
things,
plans
one
come
of the things real
forward.
quick, and I was in a hurry, but there's actually a section off of, if you look at the cemetery from Sandusky, you go in there, the back northwest corner back there's a big wooded area.
Mhm.
Well, on the other side of the land for the cemetery is, I forget the names of those roads over there, but they kind of dead end. There's an area there that could accommodate a park of sorts for that area, because that area just has nothing. And when we were out there on this tour, I
What's
told,
the baseball field end of it?
not so much a baseball, probably wouldn't be that much of an.
No, but
area.
it's beyond where.
It's off London Road.
Okay, that's what it's.
Still send those little streets that go.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's not to the London Road. It's before you
No,
get
I
to
got
that.
you.
You go down those, still some of those roads, and they dent in to the cemetery area back there. There's apartments back there.
Yeah.
It needs a shot in the dark anyways. It's not looking all that. But you know, it's one of those things. We've got the land. It's right there. And there's a road by it that goes back there around there, and it'd be real easy to put in a play toy, put some just a little pocket neighborhood park in there. So. And again, we were talking about the concept about the cemetery and parks and how that spills over. I think Ted was looking at it. What's that?
The grandkids live over there somewhere?
Grant? No.
It'd be a Halloween big toy.
And then on engineering fees, cost track,
Yes.
you know, we wanted just to kind of explain to you what we're doing in 5 minutes or less. I think, because Ken, you better run. Just generally speaking.
Right, in 5 minutes. One of the things we needed to do with that, I had mentioned this before, but we need to account for these things. And so there's an issue that we've been working with the engineering department, because we've got liability. A lot of these fees are paid up front, and so we have to show that on our financial statements as a liability. And so we needed to be able to do that. We need to be able to track. I need to be able to see what the future cost may be. The other thing is just from a cash flow standpoint and looking at our budgets. You know, we had $1.9 million coming into our general fund, and we paid out 645. Going to be able to track that on an ongoing basis. So we put in place the mechanisms to be able to do that. They are basically costing out everybody's time, which is what they didn't want to have to do, but they're paid their 8 hours or whatever their day, they're allocating it to the various projects. And we obviously have the contractor costs for inspections and engineering reviews that we can allocate to the individual developments. And so all that's being monitored. Not that it was the intent, we need to do that anyways, but the other issue out there from the development community is, should there be a truing up at some point in time? Well, the information is being generated. There's other issues that might come into play with that. And because it's one thing to say that we reimburse somebody, you know, what also, because some of them are coming up where the costs that we incurred are more than what they paid. And so, you know, but that's a whole different subject, but we should be able to do that. So I believe they've been tracking their time since the first of the year, you know, as far as going back, but moving forward, even if the issue with the development community goes away, we still need to be keeping on this, and we'll try to do that. So,
Okay. So we should have some alignment there and cost, a new baseline cost basis.
well, what we'll ultimately have as some of these mature is the ability to come back and say, here's what they paid, here's the cost we incurred, here's the staff time that was involved. For some that maybe, let's say it started last June and they paid $120,000. They probably could, but it's not going to be tied back into the actual time that's being allocated by the individual employees that are working, either doing inspections or whatever else. But at some point, one of these will be completed. And if it's completed and all the work's done at the end of the year, we should be able to say, here's what they paid, here's the cost we incurred.
But what we're planning on doing is then just updating our standard costs. Really, right? I mean, isn't that really what the end game is here, is to get
Well, I think the
standard
developers
costs?
are saying is, we think we're paying, in some cases, we might be paying more in fees than you're incurring in costs.
Costs, right.
And the way that we do it currently, it's a 7.5% of what your estimated costs are, plus our
$300 a sheet
costs.
to review.
And yeah, plus the per sheet review cost. So what they've said is, we think it's a little high, and we'd like there to be a truing up
Okay.
at some point. So
All right.
that's really ultimately one of the objectives of doing. The other, as Dean says, we have to, because it's a pretty large number, we have to account for it.
Part of our problem several years ago is we waited to the end and then bill them.
We didn't get paid.
Half the time we wouldn't get paid.
Yeah.
And so the reason we had to pay up front is to avoid that.
Sure.
And so if you're going to pay it up front, you got to use some basis to come up with what they're going to pay.
Yep.
I don't know that our numbers, 7.5% of development cost and or $300 a sheet is off by that much. From what I've seen, from what they've shared, some are above, some are below. Some maybe quite a bit, they've paid more. Some maybe quite a bit, they paid low. So we have to address that along with that.
Okay,
At least
All right.
we're not tracking it, so that's.
good deal. All right, comments?
That was a good meeting though.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Just
That
give
was-
that one real quickly, in that I agree with a lot of what David states, or David,
Fisher?
said about- No, Mike Shea.
Oh, watch it.
Mike Shea said about, as we approach these different development projects, these guys have all done their homework. They know what it takes to do what they're trying to do. I think we have to be cognizant of that. If we want to move ahead with some of these projects, we've got to be a little bit open-minded to realize that it has to be profitable for them. We have to be sometimes open to some things we've
Yeah,
done before.
Yeah, that's how the box.
But it is ultimately, if that's the direction, and it could, it perhaps will be, I think there is, I think you need to scrutinize.
Oh, absolutely.
What
Yeah.
they're asking to go into this, because that's where you get this unlevel playing field, where you've got other developers doing some of the same things and saying, well, I want to sit up in NCA for my,
And,
for my
and
street.
is that really scalable? And, from, how many times can we replicate that? What are we getting into?
So look at each individual situation independently. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, and that's why you have to establish. what the
Which is what I was
criteria.
trying to convey before. Like, in my opinion, this one's a little bit different because this is what we're trying to, this is something that's needed. Do we need more, Polte, Dominion type places? I would say, yeah,
And
but
Chris, that
this
goes
is-
back-
we do need something like this.
That goes back when Dave Gotzel was on council. This project got approved at that point.
Yeah.
The selling point was, we'll finally have a place for move-up housing
Right.
within that city school
Yeah.
district. So that's why I want to understand better
Yeah, we
what this
need
housing
details.
looks like, because you're all going to go, wait a minute, if it all ends up being your patio, they're not, it's not move-up housing, it's retirement
Right.
housing.
Yeah, we need
That's
a lot more
what,
detail to make a final decision. I just say conceptually, I support this.
Yeah, me too.
In a way, it's not too different. And it was Don Kenny, who's got a lot of money that was in here 10, 12 years ago. Some of the same arguments, saying he wanted a 12.25 mil to not just pay for Glen Road, but the rest was to do all these amenities. And that was an old Pansy School District. And even now, all the numbers, and I know there was a dip down, but even as it picked back up, they aren't anywhere close to what they were projecting. But the thing we've been, and we've been, it kind of made it sound like, well, gee, we changed well, they've been out there how many times trying to get this thing started. They're business
yeah.
people, they know. And,
Have you been up there?
you pay, the issue as far as what they can sell lots for and build houses, there's plenty of people that build houses, though. We've got plenty of houses. The value of cost of land. They can sell the houses for more to Old Tangy, but they don't pay as much for the raw land too. I know that they don't always mention that side of it. From their business, their profitability standpoint. Yeah, that's. But this is something we've been trying for a long time to get. So hopefully they can make it work. It'd just be nice if there was a way to do it to cushion the effects on us, because
Yeah,
the reality of it is, it may be nice
to
development. We still haven't solved our issue, and it's not their issue. What do we tell people in 15 years when we can't resurface the road and they got a $500,000 house sitting out there?
We'll have that tax levy passed.
Yeah, maybe.
Hopefully all those roads are private roads.
Well, no, that's all public. But like the Parkway, the Gulf Village, that NCA pays for maintenance as well as capital stuff.
But it's 12, and
And
the other
but
side of
it's a
it
bigger
too.
number.
And this is great, and everything they said, I really wish, but at some point, we're gonna have to put money into roads, because those 800 people houses.
But whether we approve the NCA or not, if they build a subdivision, we still got a problem with the road.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter.
Yes.
Right, but again, that's why it really gets back to it. Maybe it won't, maybe these type of people, but it'd be nice if we could do it and not hinder our chances of possibly
That's why I'm
passing money
thinking
someday. I don't know what that would take.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I don't think that our levy failed because of people pay NCA fees. I think our levy goes for a number of reasons that we've discussed. And I think that.
Down there it did. Ken. I
Right.
think
There's a
some-
lot of reasons why
some
it
of
didn't.
Down there.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would.
But even if we address those other issues, you know, you're talking about a small percentage of people. It's very, even if we had all those other issues addressed and percent, you know, when you've got a certain number of people and the more and more they move in, the more and more they're kind of that way, it makes it tougher to get over that hump. Because, you know, we got 48% of people are going to go vote against no matter what we do. And you're sure you're a small
Well, I
percentage.
think you found Mike, I think Mike Shaver make an excellent chairman.
Yeah, I'm sure he's been asked.
I do too.
There you go.
Chairman, I move to adjourn.
Yep, absolutely, we're at
Did
it.
he already move?
I don't know. It's a-
Sounds like he's downsized.
He
you know.
lived in Washington. Now he's